Let's discuss replacing the oil pressure sending unit on a GM. Today we're working on a 6.2 liter, but the process is going to be very similar if you're working on a 6 liter or a 5.3 liter. Now the customer concern with this vehicle is that the oil pressure gauge reads 0. Now they've been driving it this way for a couple months, so we're pretty sure that the engine obviously has somewhat of an oil pressure or we would have had severe internal damage already. So we're going to access the sending unit for testing purposes, and we're also going to install a new one if we determine that's what the problem is. So in order to access this, we're going to have to remove the beauty cover here, and we're going to end up removing the entire intake manifold to gain access to this. The sensor is actually located on the back of the engine here. So some instances you might have very small hands, you can sneak it out, but we're going to go through the process of removing the intake in order to gain access to it here. Now we've got the breather assembly removed here, and I've taken the beauty cover off. We can kind of see a little bit of what we need to get down to here. So I'm going to use a 90-degree pick to help me disconnect a couple of these electrical connectors here. See, we've got a map sensor on the top here. We've got some of the engine wiring harness here, and so I'm just going to release some of these clips and start working my way around the intake here. Disconnect the electrical throttle body connectors, get the wiring harness out of the way. Then the next step will be to let the fuel system sit for a couple minutes, make sure that there's no pressure. I'm going to disconnect the line here, remove the safety, and then use a line release tool to release that. I'm going to unbolt the fuel rail and pull the fuel rail off, and then I'm going to be able to access the individual bolts which hold down the intake manifold here, and we'll also get the alternator out of the way, so it gives us a little more room to access everything. Once that's done, I'll be able to remove the intake manifold out of the way, and we'll get down to our oil pressure sending unit. Alright, we've got all of our electrical components disconnected. I've removed the alternator and set that off to the side here. It was just 2 bolts and moved it over. Got the fuel rail out, and we've loosened up all the bolts that hold the intake into place. And so now it's time to just lift it out of here. It's going to take a little bit of wiggling. Got a bracket in the back yet we have to kind of overcome, but with some gentle maneuvering here, we'll be able to get this up out of place, and then we'll be able to access our oil pressure sending unit. Well, now we've got the intake manifold out of the way, we can see our oil pressure sending unit here. So first thing I'm going to do is unplug it, and I'm going to have to get the little gasket out of there so we can reseal the new one. But now I'm going to take my special oil pressure sending unit socket and a ratchet here, fit that on there. Broke loose pretty easy, and now I'll be able to spin out my old oil pressure sending unit. Now you can see our new one looks identical to it, OE fit, form, and function, and so we can thread that in here. You can see it comes with thread sealer already, and it's got a sealing washer on it. So we'll run that down by hand, and then we'll use our ratchet and socket, torque it back down, and we'll make our electrical connection and start the reassembly process here. Now, if this vehicle had active fuel management, a system which disables and enables lifters to kill a couple cylinders all in the name of fuel economy, those systems also have a screen under here which have a common problem with plugging up. So if you have a no oil pressure reported on the gauge unit with one of those, it's not a bad idea to disassemble this further and take a look and make sure that the screen is unrestricted. This particular vehicle does not have active fuel management, so we don't have to worry about that. We're simply going to replace the sending unit. While we've got the intake manifold off, it's a good idea to go ahead and install some new intake manifold gaskets. So we've gone ahead and cleaned up the intake surface here, we've cleaned up the cylinder heads, and so we're going to install some new gaskets. While we've got the fuel rail out, we're also going to go ahead and install some new O-rings that came on here, as well as the map sensor grommet. So it's a good idea to reseal it, clean it up while we got it apart, and now it's time to reassemble. Alright, we've got our new sending unit in place, we've got our new gaskets on the intake here, and so now we're going to work at reinstalling and setting the intake back in place. Got to get this vacuum booster hose rerouted properly here. And so once we get the whole thing settled into place, we'll go back through it and we'll retorque the bolts here. We'll go in, reinstall our fuel rail. We're going to lubricate those new O-rings so we don't cut them or cause any leaks here. And then we'll make our electrical connections again, reinstall our alternator here. Then we'll start the vehicle up and make sure that we now show oil pressure on the gauge.